Hey everybody, we're doing a series on random encounters in Dungeons & Dragons, which is a polarizing topic, but I am a huge fan of them. As you know if you've been watching this playlist, we already talked about their purpose and how to make them better. Now we're going to dig a little bit deeper, maybe a lot deeper, into the number crunchy mechanics side of things. Listen, I was an English major, so I don't plan to drown you in math here, and be sure to check below in the comments for all of the things I get wrong, I'm sure. But I think having at least a basic understanding of probability when we go reaching for the dice is a good skill for a dungeon master. A lot of this will apply to other aspects of the game as well, and plenty of other games, but we're going to stay focused in on random encounters. There is a two-part formula for random encounters laid out in the Dungeon Master's Guide. First, we roll to see if an encounter is triggered at all in the first place, and on a positive result, we roll again, often using a different kind of dice, and that result is what we use to consult the table and see what we get. It feels like explaining it actually makes it sound more complicated than it really is. In play, it turns out it's pretty simple. But let's look at that first part first. How we check for an encounter affects how often a random encounter occurs. In the last one we talked about this. How often you roll that check makes things more or less likely. If we check once an hour, we're going to have more random encounters in our game than if we check once per day. But the dice we use and what we set up as a positive result also makes a very big impact. In 5th edition, the DMG tells us to roll a d20, a 20-sided die, and on an 18 or higher, 18, 19, or 20, we get an encounter. And this is actually kind of a legacy from the earliest editions of the game where they used a d6 for everything because that's what everybody had available. So the old school way, the chance of a wandering monster coming upon you in the middle of the dungeon was a 1 on the d6. Brace yourself, here comes like the mathy parts. 1 out of 6 is around 17%, 16.66 repeating to be precise, and 3 out of 20 is 15%, pretty close. Now again, if you roll that check every 20 minutes of adventure time, old school style, versus every hour, or assuming you do it at all, in the new school way, we're 3 times as likely to trigger an encounter. Now, I'm not advocating for a specific way to do things here. My goal is to help you figure out what's best for your game and to better equip you to influence the chaos of random number generation. Beyond knowing that you can experiment and tinker with these things in the first place, I think the most useful concept on the checking for random encounter side of things is that you can do it differently in different situations. Let's say that the place the party is currently exploring is more dangerous than usual. Maybe they're in an enemy stronghold with a ton of monsters actively patrolling, or they're in the Drow city and it's got a very big population, or they're literally in hell. Now, maybe, 17 or even 16 and above triggers encounters. Of course, it can go the other way too. They're traveling through the desert or far out in the ocean and there's just less stuff going on here, so we want to decrease the chance of an encounter. We can change how often we make the check, but we can also change what gives us a result, the DC basically. I think the D20 is actually pretty nice for thinking about probabilities because there's a 5% chance for any result, for every result. If I do 2 checks a day in the forest, but only 1 in the desert, we're half as likely to get an encounter. But I can do a little more fine tuning here by just saying, okay, in this region, only the result of 19 or 20 triggers an encounter. Or, maybe you screwed up and caught a bad break, and the denizens of this dungeon are now aware that you are down here. Now a 16 or above is going to give us an encounter. That's a 25% chance. And if you're mathematically minded, you know that's the same odds you get from rolling a d4, a 4-sided die, which leads me to the other variable we can change here, the kind of dice we can roll for these checks. I'm not going to break it all down. I'm sure I've lost a ton of people already in this one, but here is the probability of rolling a 1 or any specific number really on each kind of dice we use in D&D. So if we're using the D6 for the check in the dungeon and then the players do something clever to make random encounters less likely for the next check, we can roll a D8. If they've, already cleared out most of this place, maybe we go reaching for the D12 instead. Another cool tweak here is to set different results for different numbers. Let's say we want to stick to that like 15% chance and use a D20. We could say that on a 2, you roll on a wandering monster encounter table, and on a 1, you roll on a more difficult random monster table, and on a natural 20, you roll on a table of potentially beneficial encounters. Now that might sound like a lot of work to prepare, but it can actually be easier in my experience. I am definitely better at coming up with good ideas for 3 D4 tables than 1 D12 table. That's the secret to a lot of things in life, honestly. Break up big tasks into smaller tasks. You want to make a D100 table, make 10 D10 tables, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about tables. However you determine it, once the dice tell you it's time for a random encounter, or you just decide it's time because you're the DM, and you can do that, I promise, we roll to see what we get, or you just pick something out. How big of a table we need comes down to personal preference and the situation, but for me, generally, less is more. 100 basic entries can be useful for sure when I'm trying to come up with ideas in my prep, but during the game, I'd rather have a table with fewer, more developed entries. Say you're making yourself a table for tonight's game night. If you create 20 encounters, I bet you're going to be more excited about some of those than others. You might, write your best ideas first and then run out of steam. But you also might find that after you burn through the easy, familiar stuff, those later entries were where you had to stretch your imagination and they turn out pretty cool. It's good to experiment, give yourself a lot of options, and then edit it down and maybe even embellish the smaller list, because 10 well-designed entries, in my experience, are going to be way more useful than 20 lackluster ones. Obviously, maybe the fewer entries on the table, the more likely we are to get a specific result here. I am going to put those dice probabilities up again. You can actually alter these further by having some of the entries on the table taking up several spaces. For instance, let's say you are more likely to encounter gnolls in the Broken Lands compared to anything else. So on a 1 or a 2 or even a 3, we get that same result. If you really want to dial in probabilities, you can use that D100 table and set different ranges for each entry. This is actually a very popular approach. But though it's statistically unlikely, I always find that when 63 gives us the same thing that 58 got us a few sessions ago, it kind of falls flat. I like each number to have a unique entry, just personal preference, which is why my preferred method to play with these probabilities is by using multiple dice, mostly 2d6. If we roll a single die, whatever denomination it is, each result is as likely as any other, unless it's defective or you're cheating. But interesting stuff happens when we start using combinations of dice. Rolling a d12, there's an 8% chance of every entry, but look at the results of 2d6. Pretty interesting, right? There are 5 different combinations that will get us an 8, but there's only one way to get a 2. We're going to get a 7 roughly 3 times as often as we hit 11. I call this a bell curve pretty often, but that's technically not true, I admit it, but still, I find it's useful to think of it like that because we can put our common results in the middle and the real crazy stuff out there on the outer edges. We're about half as likely to hit 2 or 12 on this 2d6 as we are to get a natural 1 or a natural 20 on the d20. So when they come up, it's significant. The example random encounter table in the DMG actually uses a 1d8 plus a 1d12, and that gives us really interesting results. I'm going to graph it on anydice.com and put up here for you. If you are still watching this video and enjoy stuff like this, you might enjoy messing around with this website, anydice.com. 1d8 plus 1d12 gives us this really distinct plateau from 9 to 13. Then the outsides become less and less likely. A little over half the time we roll on this, we should land on 8 to 14. So I would make 7 down to 2 progressively scarier, and 15 to 20 progressively more rewarding. And if for any reason I decided that I want to flatten this curve and make the chance of every result the same, I can just roll a d20 on a table like this and have a 1 mean re-roll or roll twice or Dungeon Master's choice. I really love the customization and control using probability curves like this gives me if I want something really elusive in this region. I want to put Bigfoot in this forest. I can fine tune it so that common things are way more likely, but there's always a chance you'll stumble upon the Sasquatch. The main criticism of tables like this is that you're mostly going to get the results in the middle, and that's where you put the boring stuff, and I have 2 responses to that. 1, you decide what goes where. So if you want something to happen, put it in the middle, or just decide it happens. You're the dungeon master. This is your world. And 2, there shouldn't be any boring entries here. If you fill up a table with 19 entries and half of them are boring, edit it down and try D6 and D4. Different designs are going to give you different results. So I recommend experimenting, try some different things, and see what works for you. You can go crazy with it too. Look at this real quick. Those outliers on that D8 plus D12 are 2 groups of 6 or maybe 7, depending on how you look at things. So let's say between town and the dungeon is a forest where fey creatures and an evil wizard are having a war for control. The most likely outcomes, that top of the trapezoid, are going to be stuff like elves with blink dogs battling zombies with hellhounds, or maybe the aftermath of one of those battles. Maybe if we trigger an encounter in the clear light of day, we're only rolling a d6 or 2d4 on that outlier side that's all fey. And if it's the middle of the night, we roll on the all evil side. Or maybe one side eventually wins if the players get involved, or if maybe they don't get involved. I've seen other tables where you simply add a modifier for nighttime. So there are 10 entries and the later ones are at night, but you're only rolling a d6 or a d8 and then like adding +2, +4 to slide into the night side. The next level of complexity has to be the nested table, which I really enjoy. I guess the simplest version of this is an entry like D8 goblins and D4 wargs where you roll again, but what I'm really talking about is you roll and you get goblins, and then you roll on another set of entries to see if they are riding wargs or setting traps or hunting giant centipedes or limping home after the kobolds beat them up. I use this type of table a lot in my home game now, crossing out and occasionally like replacing entries as things come up and situations change. In the next video, I'm going to show you exactly how I've been using random encounter tables to give me the most satisfying open world game I've ever played, which I think my players enjoy too, but I really love. I'm also going to share a set of tables I've made that you can use and customize for your game. I'm very excited to do that. I'm really looking forward to it. So until then, get out there, have fun, be kind to yourself, be kind to each other, and I will see you next time. Thanks.